Welcome to App Talk with Upptic, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of how to grow apps and games. We speak with industry experts about specific strategies, tools, and tactics they use to find success, and we keep you up to date with emerging news and trends in the ever-changing games, marketing, and technology ecosystem. My name is Xander Agosta, Director of Marketing here at Upptic, and joining me today are my co-host,
Warren Woodward, co-founder of Upptic.
And our guest,
Derrick Morton, President of FlowPlay.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Derrick. Happy to have you.
Good to be around. It's 10, so I'm awake.
Awesome. So our first section is Industry Insights, where we do a deep dive in industry news, a couple of interesting articles to cover this week. So pass it off to Warren to get us started.
Yeah, we're going to start with the spicy one. So we've been tracking over the podcast some interesting acquisitions from Embracer Group over the last year or two. And this was one we were not expecting. So they acquired Lord of the Rings IP. So with this, we're going to link an article from the Washington Post. Swedish entertainment company buys rights to Lord of the Rings films and other Tolkien intellectual properties. So quick poll quote, Embracer Group agreed to acquire Middle-earth Enterprises from the Saul Zaentz company. The deal gives Embracer the rights to the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit film trilogies and any Tolkien-related movies, video games, board games, merchandising, theme parks, and stage productions. The purchase was part of 6 acquisitions by Embracer Group totaling 6 billion Swedish krona, which is about $573 million. Do want to clarify that this deal is specifically for Middle-earth Enterprises, so they don't own the Tolkien catalog outright. Middle-earth Enterprises was the entity that specifically owns the IP licensing rights. So it's a little confusing, but they can essentially now control the licensing of these franchises. And just as a reminder, so Embracer Group has been on a spree of picking up these IPs over the last couple of years. We saw them pick up IPs including Borderlands, Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, and Thief, and some in the gaming world, and then multimedia properties including Umbrella, Academy, Sin City, 300, and Hellboy. And then one last note, that Embracer Group recently took a $1 billion investment from Savvy Gaming, which is from the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Investment Fund. And they are definitely putting that money to use. So this was a big and unexpected acquisition. Guys, what do you think about this play from Embracer and just their general strategy of doubling down on IP?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of it until you sent it over, and it feels a little off target for them. I mean, Embracer's been, their sole purpose up until recently has been just to roll up game companies, right? They're a public company, and their goal is to just buy medium to medium large game companies and roll them into one large company and have a public company. And they've been very successful at that, bought a lot of stuff, bought some friends of mine's companies, and those friends are happy with the arrangement, happy with their new ownership. But owning the Tolkien catalog and the video and movie rights, that's a big deal. I'm not sure how well aligned they are to take advantage of it. Hopefully they won't try and make their own movies. They'll find really competent people to go out and make movies and things for them, because I don't see it going well if Embracer decides that they're another Warner Brothers or a motion picture studio capable of doing something great. I read they're thinking about a Gandalf spinoff film.
Okay, I'd watch it.
What are you thinking about this?
Yeah, we've been following Embracer pretty closely. I mean, one of our first Upptic clients was an Embracer Group acquisition. And, I think it was pretty critical last time we talked about them, just taking money from the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. We talked about the necessity there because they basically have been it was basically their only growth strategy is inorganic growth. And so they needed to take on ever more money to continue to roll up more and more properties. I think the Lord of the Rings IP is obviously incredibly valuable IP. And the thing that really makes sense to me is they own all these game developers. So now they took this IP and they can roll it down to their different game developers and produce Lord of the Rings games, which I think would do really well. I think that is maybe the most obvious first step of like, okay, where can we immediately be creative with this acquisition? That seems like a really, really obvious one. Embracer is very much focused on the Confederated States model. They are largely decentralized, and each of these game companies largely work independently. And I'm curious, I'm not certain that is over the long period of time the way that you're going to get the most value out of all the different satellite states that they have in these game developers. But I mean, it's worked for them so far. I mean, would you go buy Embracer? I guess question for you guys, you look at the stock price for Embracer Group, would you go buy it today? I mean, do you see it as like forward looking? Are these guys in a position to dominate continuing going forward?
I'm not going to claim to be, a master of evaluating companies, but I do want to back up to one thing that Derrick mentioned, that a couple of pieces just clicked together with me. Like we've seen Embracer kind of do two distinct things here. As Derrick said, like acquiring small to medium-sized game developers, with the unspoken implication that in those acquisitions, they believe those developers are capable of doing more than they've done in the past. Then on the other hand, they're acquiring these medium to exceptional IPs.
Right.
So I could see sort of like the boardroom pitch of doing some kind of arbitrage there. Like if we can acquire, what we believe are great developers that haven't had a huge hit, and pair that with like amazing IP, maybe this is a way that we can unlock, blockbuster game development below market cost, versus acquiring a combined entity that's already a AAA developer with their own IP. I don't know. Do you guys think that might be the play that they're going for here?
I get that, but like, why wouldn't you just buy game rights?
Well, they've been doing that too, right? They just bought a bunch from, was it Square Enix, where they bought like just recently Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, and Thief, which those are my childhood right there.
I mean, when it relates to the Tolkien catalog, why would you take, book rights and movie rights and the whole enchilada? If you're what you're really good at is this game stuff, you can get that much cheaper than you can by getting the whole catalog.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe it's a diversification play as well. I wonder if it's a way that they feel that they can, diversify their revenue streams away from just gaming. So, we're currently in a bit of a downturn in the gaming market. So maybe there's some appeal in that as well.
Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, one of the interesting thing is I know the Amazon deal for the Lord of the Rings rights for their Rings of Power was like a $250 million deal over, I can't remember how long, 5 years or something like that. So it seems like this could potentially be accretive in the like medium term to them, like as just a right holder, and then if they're able to get some more squeeze out of it by licensing the IP to their own companies, I think maybe there's a long-term trend there. I think the other thing is because they're getting so big, like they kind of have to swing big in order to make an impact on the bottom line. Maybe that's it. I'm not, this isn't my area of expertise.
Nice. Why don't we got a lot to cover. Why don't we go on to the next story?
Okay,
so up next today, we have, I believe this was actually the cover story from the most recent issue of Bloomberg, but the headline is "A Crypto Winter King Wants to Reanimate the Industry." And this was essentially a profile on Yatsu, who, for those that don't know, he is the head of Animoca Brands. And the first thing that jumped out about this piece was they did some amazing illustrative artwork of Yacht as the Night King from Game of Thrones, which just has to be seen to be believed. But I thought this was a really cool profile piece. Thought it was fair and reasonable, which is something that we don't see in most Web3 based profile pieces. Most of them right now are extremely negative. And during the bull market, they were all more extremely glowing. But yeah, for anyone who doesn't know Animoca, you probably haven't listened to the podcast before because we talk about them a lot, but they either own or are invested in essentially every relevant Web3 gaming business or gaming related NFT brand. So this includes things like Sandbox, Axie Infinity, OpenSea, Dapper Labs, Yuga, which is the group behind Bored Ape Yacht Club. The list is endless. I think it's over 350 investments that they have right now. But yeah, it's a great profile piece. One thing that I think most people don't know about Animoca is they were like basically a struggling, maybe even go so far to say as failed mobile game developer that just toiled for years. And then they placed a bet on the distribution rights for CryptoKitties and kind of never looked back from there as far as like leading in the Web3 space. So yeah, just a couple of quick pull quotes from the article. The crypto winter has wiped out $2 trillion in digital currency market value since November, and many investors have gone into hibernation. Animoca, Asia's biggest investor in blockchain projects, is assembling a vast portfolio of finance, gaming, and social media companies, more than 340 in all. And Xander pulled a cool little graphic that shows kind of the VC activity in crypto startups, and it's pretty interesting. You just see like a 45-degree angle up and to the right from like late 2020 through Q1 of this year, and then just falling off a cliff when we hit Q3 this year. But the article goes on to talk about Animoca's strategy of really going on the offensive now that we're in this bear market. And one of the companies they invest in said, if people say this is crypto winter, then 2018 is, sorry, this is a quote from Yacht. He said, if people say this is crypto winter, then 2018 was the crypto ice age. Now is the time to deploy more capital, not less. And so of note, I think Animoca has been through this cycle before. They've seen like a crazy crash in the market, and they've seen how it can pan out to make investments at this time. So they're basically just broadcasting their strategy. And yeah, like it's to the point where Animoca is so omnipresent now, where someone gave the quote, people are saying they're everywhere. So if Animoca is not invested in you, what's wrong with you? So it's become such a mark of not even mark of pride, but almost like a necessarily requirement for people to see your Web3 gaming project as valid, that they're establishing something pretty powerful here. So yeah, what do you guys think of overall of Animoca broadcasting the strategy of basically saying like, yeah, we're doubling down in the space, we're investing even harder in this bear market? What are your thoughts on this strategy and this profile on them?
It's hard to call it a strategy because they're just buying everything, it feels like. It's hard. I mean, obviously, if you've got cash, this is the time to buy. There's going to be lots of cheap assets to buy. Lots of companies that thought for sure their next round was well secured, or that they'd be able to just issue a bunch of NFTs, and that would be bring in the cash that they'd need to support their business for the short term. So it's a great time to have cash. It's a great time to invest in Web3 if you've got the cash. But like I said, it's hard for me to identify, what is the strategy versus just he's got a shotgun and he's just shooting everything out of the sky he can find.
Yeah, we've talked to many people at Animoca. We had Robbie on this podcast, Robbie, CEO of Animoca, on the podcast, and his basic premise is he thinks all gaming is going to be crypto gaming at some point, which I think I had a slight disagreement with his perspective on that. We sort of had a conversation, but he has a compelling argument. It's like, why even games, you used to have to buy a box and then sell the box of your favorite N64 game or whatever. And he says like, hey, I think in the long term, over the long term of history, you'll be able to basically do that with your digital games as well, even if they are premium and not IP. Not sure, we'll see. But I think that is sort of the bet that him and Yacht are taking, is like, listen, we believe this is a step change in the games industry, that everything will eventually flow through to being a crypto game. And so they're making that bet. And even if they're not quite 100% right with that, there's still so much value that's going to be created in the crypto gaming space. They are so well positioned. And we have I think we're big fans of Animoca. We think they do a really good job. And we have a slew of guests from Animoca coming up in the next few months, so stay tuned for more of the Animoca brands.
Yeah, we're basically going to have Animoca month coming up pretty soon here. Xander, I think I would put like a slight asterisk to sort of like Animoca's take on the space and the things that Robbie said. I feel like the term crypto game is almost like a derogatory term.
Sure.
And I think their position is more like the model that we have right now of like, there's a game and you play and earn a token and you can sell the token. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily what Animoca thinks is going to be omnipresent. I just think
Sure.
that their play is like, some aspect of the underlying building blocks of ownable assets, including the game itself being an ownable asset. I feel like that's the broader thesis that they have.
The public marketplace for assets.
Yes.
Yeah, and the tangibility. And they actually had a really interesting, I think it's in this article or somewhere else, basically they sunset one of their old games because they lost the Formula One license. They had a racing game, which was a blockchain-based game that had a Formula One license. They sunset the game because they lost the license. But because people still hold the assets of the game, that they earned in the game, they're now going to spin up a new game, which is going to take those assets and transport them into that game, which is pretty freaking cool. As opposed to a game dying, you losing everything in it. Now, actually, you get to maintain some of that value as they rebuild this game over time. So, like you said, we're fans of theirs, and more to come. Any other thoughts here?
I believe that there's still so much friction that it's hard for me to know when or guess when it'll be mass market.
Yeah,
it's
100%.
Not easy to do. I don't get why MetaMask is the only solution out there, or one of the only solutions out there for like getting your crypto into a browser. And then even that's not easy to do. So, and I think until somebody solves that, it's going to be hard to take it mass market.
No, that's spot on. It's one of the worst things about Web3 gaming right now. You have to jump through so many hoops just to have an experience. So very alienating new people. And to me, I think that the thing that really has to be solved is how can the major platforms get their piece of the pie in a way that makes sense for both parties, where Apple and Google are incentivized to streamline the onboarding process for their devices, which doesn't exist yet.
Well, I'm a big fan of game assets as NFTs because you can participate in the transaction forever, right? So every time it changes hands, if you build your contract correctly, you can get 10% of that transaction each time that sword changes hands with somebody. So as a game developer, I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea. I'm not so sure that the model that people talk about often of using the same sword in multiple games is ever going to work, because that to me as a guy who makes games is like, well, how do you balance that sword across 3 games? I just don't see how that works.
Yeah, so many thoughts here.
Within the same game, and having a marketplace where people can buy assets that they're now a fan and the other guy's not playing the game as much anymore, or just got super lucky on a loot box and said, holy shit, I've got a $1,000 item here. I'm a big believer in that piece.
Yeah, I've like so many thoughts, and there's a whole podcast I think just here. I think
Sure.
One of the things that whatever eventually exists as Web3 games is going to look completely different than what we see today. I think one of the interesting things I can imagine in the short term is an internal studio making a series of games, and then having assets have different uses across the different games. They could exist. You could get into one and use it for something else in another. I think that seems really, really interesting in terms of moving players in between your own games. I think that the staking as it exists today in games, I hope dies. I think it's actually pretty negative, and I can sort of talk about why that is some other time. I don't think it's worth doing a deep dive here. But I guess any other thoughts here? We have one more crypto piece before we go on to our main review.
I mean, Xander, I can talk about this for hours, but one thing that I've been talking a lot with the Web3 developers I've been meeting with lately is just when I had this realization. It's quite apparent, but there's so much being built in the space right now, and we literally have 0 models of long-term sustainable projects. Like mobile is a world of copy paste plus 1. Like that's what 95% of products are. Like there has been no, even the largest games in the space have had to do massive pivots when an original business model has not worked out. So it's just a crazy time. And I don't know if there's been a parallel to this at least in gaming, where there's so much being built, but literally not one. I mean, maybe VR, you could argue there's some parallels in VR.
Hope
but
not.
but just we're so much money, so much being built, lots of potential, but no example of a long-term sustainable gaming business model. It's just crazy times and very fascinating.
Yeah. So someone who's doing very well in the Web3 ecosystem is FTX. So here's a report from, I believe it's CoinDesk. Yes, CoinDesk. FTX posted $1 billion in revenue last year amid crypto rally. Sam Bankman-Fried's crypto exchange FTX posted 1.02 in revenue last year, jumping 1,000% from 89 million in the prior year, CNBC reported, citing internal documents that it had viewed. FTX posted a net income of 388 million in 2021, up from just 17 million in 2020, the document showed. During the first quarter of 2022, FTX recorded 270 million in revenue and is on track to post about 1.1 billion in revenue this year. So FTX is a super interesting business. It's the largest crypto exchange in the globe, I believe. Is that, Warren, you want to double check if that's right? I know it's larger than Coinbase for sure. I'm thinking it is the largest in the world. And they're an obvious winner of the crypto winter. They've been able to do stuff like buy BlockFi, which is my preferred non-custodial wallet, which you can the maxis can crucify me for. But for pennies on a dollar, I think they spent 25 million for it when it had raised like $400 million in VC funding. And so they're just snapping up assets left and right. So obviously, I think they've done a very, very good job monopolizing the space. And I was kind of interested in the company, so I started looking it up, and they're not publicly traded, so you can't actually own FTX, right? But they do have an ownership token as a token, which you can buy on their exchange. And I was like, I haven't touched anything like that so far. And so I'm curious, Warren or Derek, do you have any experience with these type of ownership tokens and like how much of a risk proposal it is to sort of snap these things up, or is that just completely speculative?
Well, I mean, you're talking about crypto, so it's
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
speculative.
Yeah.
No, I've seen that with other exchanges. So there's other Korean exchanges and Hong Kong exchanges that have done the same thing, where they've issued their own token alongside their other sales products. I'm not sure what the value of owning a token in the exchange is. Like, what is the purpose of that? I don't see what they're doing with it, or what the utility of it is. And I guess that's the key word here, right? What is when you're selling a token, what is the utility of that token?
Well, in theory, it's a claim on their the revenues, right, which they can issue in their own token. Well, let's take a step back. Let's just talk about the value. I mean, so everyone's getting crushed. These guys are not. I mean, I guess it's good to be king, right?
How are they not getting crushed? I'm so confused by that. And one thing that kind of triggered my brain was like, there was some sort of a leaked deck that people got a hold of that was how we found out about their 2022 revenues. So I'm not sure.
He tweeted. He tweeted. Oh yeah, leaked. He tweeted the numbers were pretty correct. I think the main thing is it's trading. They take a cut of trades, and so no matter what, they're getting. If you're shorting or you're buying or whatever, you're still getting a piece of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's an interesting coincidence that we're covering FTX and Animoca both this week, because there's a lot of parallels. I mean, both have been through the cycles before. Both built up cash in the last bull market and then are going on acquisition sprees in this bear market, and they're almost like interlocking pieces of the same puzzle. Like, whereas Animoca is primarily gaming focused, but dabbles in DeFi and other parts of the space. FTX really owns everything related to like finance, exchanges, and DeFi, but is I'd say dabble, because it's still I think billions of dollars, but dabbling in gaming. And so I wonder if we're seeing them kind of like rise up as I mean, clearly today, like they're the two biggest names in the crypto space. I'm curious what the long-term relationship between these entities will be. But I definitely wouldn't bet against Sam Bankman-Fried. Like, he's been extremely savvy with both like the investment decisions they've been making, but just like how they've been managing their money. Like he made his name initially as a trader, and I think you can tell it in some of the ways that he manages their portfolio.
Hopefully he's not levered as much as a lot of the traders and exchanges are out there, and as we've seen with a couple of different big headline stories of markets that crash.
Well, they're spinning off profits, and that's the difference, right? They're one of the ones, they have business model, they're spinning off profits, and that's different than most of the people in the space. Okay, let us go ahead and move on to our main topic, where we're going to do sort of a hard pivot and talk about building teams and culture. So, Derek, you've been building teams for quite some time. I'm sure Warren is also going to have some input on some of these questions as well. But let's just go to you first, Derek. Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what FlowPlay is, and what you do there.
Okay, so making games is the only real job I've ever had. I've been a bartender, I've been a waiter, I've done other things, but in the early 90s, I started making games. So I've been doing it about 30 years now. Started off making CD-ROM games, that you have to go to the store and actually buy and bring home. Then I got into online games in the late 90s with a series of companies. One was called iWin. iWin was an online game company. At one point we were the 6th biggest internet company in the world. Wow. Traffic wise, it was pretty crazy, but that was 1999, 2000. So things were insane back then. But luckily we sold that company and to a public company called Uproar. I worked for Uproar for a while. Then Uproar was bought by Vivendi. And then Vivendi bought Blizzard, so we were part of Blizzard's Vivendi, VUG, Vivendi Universal Gaming, all kinds of crazy stuff going on there. So that was a wild ride. I was the VP of product for online for the Vivendi Universal Games Group. and got to see a lot going on. I actually ran a website. One of our properties was virtualvegas.com. So I got my taste for social casino watching a virtual Vegas. Went on to a company called Game House up here in Seattle. We sold Game House to Real Networks. I had to work at Real Networks for a couple of years. I started their mobile division in 2004. Built 25 mobile games between 2004 and 2006. It was a terrible time to be in mobile games. You had 64K to build a mobile game in. That includes graphics and everything. So you have to be extremely creative.
Like one day of UA spend now.
You have to be extremely creative to make a game in 64K. And I hated that. So the guy that was one of the guys I hired to build some of those games for me, Doug Pearson, got along really great with, really brilliant guy. He's got an PhD in artificial intelligence. So I asked him to start a company with me. I had an earnout with Real Networks, had to work there for 3 years, but 2 years in, I told them that I was going to start my own company and gave my 1 year notice. And so Doug and I spent the next year trying to figure out what company we would start and what we would build and why we would build it. So there were a couple of things in mind. It was 2006, and we decided that virtual currencies and virtual worlds were the things that would shape where games were going. And so we built a platform and raised money around that idea. Intel Capital, the investment arm of the Intel, the chip maker, gave us our Series A to go do that. And so we built a platform for virtual currencies and virtual worlds, launched it in January 2007. Our first game was called ourWorld. It was mostly for teenage girls, but a virtual world where teenage girls could, buy clothing, have an apartment, buy furniture, invite their friends over, go ice skating. We had almost 300 games that we licensed from developers around the world that inside the game that kind of drove the economy.
Sounds like the metaverse before was cool.
We still, that game launched in 2008. And we get letters all the time from people like telling us, hey, I grew up in your game. That's how I learned to talk to people. That's how I learned to, go out on dates before I actually could go out on dates in the real world. It's pretty incredible. So 2012, we launched a social casino on the same platform. So we took what was a teenage game and made it for older ladies. Now Vegas World is a game where older ladies are 25 and hot. They love it. 65,000 people have gotten married in our wedding chapel. Wow. There's a lot of social activity in the games. People fall in love. People form lifelong friendships. They meet each other at little conventions from around the world and go hook up and hang out together. And so we sold the company in December to a casino chain called Wind Creek Hospitality.
This December, like recently?
This past December.
Oh, wow. Okay. Congratulations.
Yeah. So we sold the company to Wind Creek. Wind Creek's a great company. They've got casinos in the Caribbean and all throughout the U.S. They have 7 casinos across the U.S. Like Philadelphia, Georgia, Florida, Chicago, and Nevada.
Nice. Cool. Like I'm
sorry.
yeah. Well, I would love to. I'm very curious about social casino, and I almost want to talk about that. But I think we should maybe stay on task and maybe come back to the end if there's still time.
Quick side note, Derrick. I think I missed you. I was looking at your LinkedIn. I think I missed you by about 10 years. But I also worked for the Game House Real Networks ish.
Oh,
entity.
Really?
Yeah, I worked for Blastworks briefly in like the mid 2010s, which was like. I think it's like that essentially what the Game House rebrand for like their mobile division. It was all a little confusing to me even when I was there.
Yeah, I started the mobile group in 2004. Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess the place I want to focus on is like, obviously you can't make all these games and work over all this time without building really good teams. And so that's the sort of thing I want to focus on now.
Yep.
And if we take a step back and just think, what are truisms that have lasted through the ages? What are some of the key components for building successful teams?
Wow. Well, I have a specific theory and specific things I do that are probably a little different from a lot of other people. For me, I think the most successful products are made by collaboration. I think it's there's another approach. There's some people that think like the vision of one person the one director, like a movie, is the way to go, and there's successful games that are made that way. But for me, I think games are such multifaceted things, from the visual perspective, from a logic perspective, from a programming perspective. I think you have to have a really collaborative team. And so one thing I tell people when we talk about this subject is, I'm not into rock stars. I don't like having people on my team who really have huge egos. I mean, I've got some brilliant team members, but they're humble about it, and that's what I look for, is people that are smart enough to know that they don't know everything, and that by collaborating with other people and learning from other people and sort of working together, that you can create something much greater than you could if you're building it by yourself and sort of like thinking, well, I know it all, I'm not going to listen to anybody on my team. So that's the first point. And we call it the no asshole policy, because it's sort of related to that. I test for, does this person get along with people? Am I going to enjoy actually being in a room with this guy? Because when it comes down to it, it's my company, and I want to have fun working there. And I don't want to have to deal with personalities that are hard to manage, hard to juggle, where I'm apologizing to other people for their behavior. I want everybody to enjoy working there.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I think Warren could say that he very much subscribes to that same interview process. I mean, I think my interview process with Warren was hanging out and playing a Magic tournament, and so I was like, no idea if I can do the job or not. Just like, can I stand here?
Yeah, I agree with those sentiments, Derek. I was just going to throw in like a couple of things that we really try to do when building out teams here. A couple of tips on my end. One is just like, try to be in a position where you can be, these two things are related. Try to be in a position where you can be hiring proactively rather than reactively. If your team is completely overstaffed or like overworked, and you're trying to backfill to get work done, you're a lot more likely to take the first qualified person, and a lot less likely to get like the optimal person for your company and for your culture. And like the other side of that is, our philosophy is to try to hire great people, not hire roles. So it's a little, I think it's easier when you're a startup and things are more flexible. Like, especially when you're smaller stage company like us, there's a million things that you want to do. And so when we kind of scout for people, even if it's like, well, our job is for a UA role, this person only checks about half those boxes, but they'd be really great at this thing that we know is going to be a future initiative. Like even Xander, when we brought you in, like your background's more in marketing, but you did a bunch of stuff in our first 2 years that had sort of nothing to do with what you wanted to do. But hopefully that worked out. But that's two tips from our end.
Yeah. So go ahead. No.
I would say too, like, you sparked an idea in my head that in the beginning, what you really want are a lot of generalists. You want people that can really cover a lot of bases, because startups, you have very ill-defined roles usually, because, I know as CEO, I was doing the customer acquisition, I was doing the finance, I was doing the QuickBooks in the early days. I was wearing a lot of hats, and so was a lot of other people. So I think you certainly look for generalists in the early stages of the company. That's
a great tip as well.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about, I'd like to get specific here, but I'm not exactly sure how, is like, what are things to avoid when growing a team? And we talked a little bit about no asshole rule, but like maybe it's like tactically, what are specifically things you can do to screen for that? And like, what are other pitfalls you want to avoid when trying to grow a team, especially growing a team quickly?
Well, one thing that I've found, and in kind of prepping for this a little bit, thinking back on my career and things that I've done that were good and bad, some of the best things I've done involved making sure that everybody knows each other on a personal level. I think that it's very easy for people to take advantage of other people or not appreciate other people's work if they don't really know them on a personal level. So I make sure that we go to dinners, that we do things together as a team, so that he came in late on Monday because he's got a kid he's got to drop off at 9:30, and his wife's working too. So if you know just a little bit about the other people you're working with, then it smooths out a whole lot of issues. You really get a lot solved that way. One of the most extreme examples of that is I used to have a team in Helsinki, and when we first bought this company, there became this antagonistic relationship between the Seattle team and the Helsinki team. The Helsinki team would complain about the Seattle team to me, and the Seattle team would complain about the Helsinki team to me. And what I realized is, like, they didn't know each other. All they were like these people over email, because we weren't using Zoom or any of these kind of tools at the time. It was all over email and over phone calls. And so I forced it. I made 3 people from Helsinki come to Seattle, and I made 3 people from Seattle go to Helsinki to sort of like integrate the teams. And it's unbelievable what that does. People come back after doing this experiment for a month, and a lot of the friction went away. There was no longer the sort of like complaining about these people over there. It was like, oh no, those guys are on our team. They work with us. We're all part of a unit.
Yeah, and I think in the context of the new world we're living in, I don't know how remote you guys are, but we're fully remote. I think that's probably more important than ever, getting some FaceTime with each other so people can really know each other on sort of a more intimate level. And so then when you're not just like a bubble on a screen, you're like a real human, which I think is will do a lot. And we have seen that it does a lot for cohesion, building team cohesion. One thing I wanted to sort of focus on is culture. And I think, basically anyone who builds teams talks about culture at some point. And to begin, what I'd like to talk about is like, how do you define culture in a corporate environment? And I guess maybe let's go to both of you for this, but you can go first, Derrick.
Culture is who you hire. I mean, you can do things like design an office in a certain way, and you can have events, and you can have organize your team and have them sit in certain places in proximity to one another and arrange the seating and stuff. But it really comes down to the people that you hire, and trying to hire people that are at least in a similar mindset, or at least have similar things that they think are important. So that's the first step, is just being cognizant of that, or seeing how someone else that you might hire for the team would fit in. And they don't have to be homogeneous. They can be different, but different in a way that one things we test for is creativity. So even if you're an engineer, I want a creative engineer. I want somebody that listens to music, somebody that appreciates art, somebody, so that we have these sort of touchstones that we can talk about and have in common.
Yeah. So Warren, same question to you. Like, how do you define what culture means in a corporate environment?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and as you said, Xander, this gets even harder for remote teams. Like, it's fine to have like a list of company values, and we have that too. But you can't tell people this is like, it's not an effective way to just say like, this is our culture, and it just becomes so, right? I think the best you can do if you are, if you're a founder or if you're a manager is I mean, it's cliche, but like, you have to demonstrate the things that you want to be part of your culture. One thing I personally try to do is try to really be of service to my team, and really show that, like, a value that I want for our company is basically like, we rise and fall together. Don't ever place blame on a single individual, because our problems are a lot more complex and a combination of our combined work. So, the best I can do for that is to, come to my team and not say, hey, you need to do this or this, but rather like, hey, it seems like this is a difficult issue. Like, what can I do to, like, what resources do you need to solve this? Or what can I do to like take some of this pain away from you? And so I've definitely seen that, like, the more that I have generally tried to, not telling people these are the values, but just embody the values, the more I have generally seen them reflected by the people I work with. And just backing up a little bit, I did want to touch on, when we talk to the negative, the pitfalls, like bunker mentality is like another term I would use for what Derrick was speaking to, but that's like one of the biggest cultural pitfalls of like a us versus them. It can be between your teams, it can be between your team and your clients or the other party. And like, that was really magnified to me in like my first game industry job at a publisher. where we found out that one of our developers actually had on their company fridge, they had an image of like the product lead from our team at the publisher, and it just said our enemy, and it was just the publishing product lead, and that was just like in their on magnet to the front of their fridge. So like, what does that do?
Wow.
It's like bunker mentality in the extreme of like us versus them. Like, how are you possibly going to have and big shock, like that game flopped, you know, but this is to me almost like a parody of like how you can make that bunker mentality a pitfall.
Yeah. One thing I do with my team is or make sure that people feel like we care about them as people. And it's not just we care about you because you're a great engineer, we care about you because you're a great artist, we care about you as people. I have one-on-ones with my direct reports, but we try not to talk about work too much. I meet with them for a half hour at least once a month, and usually we go for a walk if the weather's decent, and we'll just go for a walk and we'll say, how's your kids? How's your family? What's happening? Is there anything bothering you? Anything worrying you? And it's really not like, hey, did you get that email out to that person last Thursday? It's really about, hey, let's just chat and see. I want to know where your head is.
So, I mean, a few of the sort of key takeaways, if we're to summarize, it's like, one, start with hiring good people. Two, behave in a way that you think is respectable and inspires. It seems like that's sort of, you know, those are, I'm gonna say basic, but that's like, you know, that's sort of the core of what you need to be doing is like get good people and then behave reasonably yourself. One of the things I kind of want to talk about is when it fails. So, you know, obviously every once in a while you make a bad hire, people get in arguments. It's not always smooth sailing everywhere, especially in high growth environments where there's a lot of stress on there can be a lot of stress on people. How do you deal with conflict and failure within these teams? And when people are, you know, at each other's throat, what are some tactical actions you can take to diffuse the situation and make sure that everyone grows as responsive to it?
I can start here, maybe.
Go ahead.
You know, one thing I think, you know, is really important and that we always try to do, like, there's going to be constant failure. Like you're making a game, the odds are incredibly against you. You know, it's like 1 out of 10 at best. So if you're in this business, you have to go in like, you know, aiming for success, but being very ready to deal with failure. And one of the things that I've always tried to do and encourage my teams is like really like identify and own the failures, and just be the first to bring attention to them, of say like, hey, this is going worse than expected. This is why it's happening. Like never try to ignore it or sweep it under the rug. That's only going to lead to the problem getting magnified and increased tensions. It's usually viewed as quite honorable by whoever you're working with to just be like, even like, hey, we made a massive mistake and I want to talk to you about it, you know? And I think that's just entering these situations with open eyes and talking about them plainly, rather than placing blame, rather than sweeping under the rug. I'd say that's like my most fundamental tip for how to deal with failure.
I had a terrible boss, but he often had great advice, and then I use this one with my team a lot. It's I say fail loudly. So if the moment you know anything's going on that you feel like is headed in the wrong direction, let everybody know, because that's what we're here for. We're here to support you. We're here to figure this stuff out. So don't keep it to yourself. Don't stress over things. The best way to relieve that stress is to let the world know, like, hey, I'm worried about this thing. It's not on the right path. It's not going not going how I want it to. So be vocal about it, because that's how you get help, and that's how you find, you know, the better you can, the earlier you can head these things off, the better.
Right. And I think there's like a hidden superpower to taking an approach like that, which is like when things actually matter and you feel like, you know, maybe you're not in agreement with whoever you're working with. If you've been quick to own, like, yeah, I was wrong here, I made a mistake here, it gives you a lot more leeway and authority to be like, you know, actually, I think you might be making a misstep here, and here's why I think we need to pivot. If you're someone who always insists on things needing to go your way, or I'm always right, I can't make mistakes, you lose that legitimacy really quickly.
Right.
Most conflicts are misunderstandings. Most conflicts are people thinking something about the other person that's probably incorrect.
Totally.
So clearing up that misunderstanding, and that's what it is the best way to sort of get over it and move on, is to figure out, what did you think was happening, what was really happening, what were they really thinking, that they weren't really doing something towards you. It just felt like it was towards you.
Right, and that really gets magnified in remote teams, right? Because if you're both in the same room with each other, there's social cues, someone's content, like intonation in their voice is very clear. But if you're pissed off at someone and read a sentence from them, over Slack or whatever, if you're already feeling like they're an asshole, you're going to read it with the worst intent
Right.
and in the snippiest voice coming from them, right? And so I think that's one reason it's all the more complicated for remote teams to sort out these conflicts.
And you never know what kind of day someone's having, right?
Right.
Like, if you don't know them at all, it goes back to what I was talking about. If you don't know they've got a young child they're trying to care for who's giving them up all night, then maybe you don't know why they're cranky today. But if you knew that, you'd understand.
Derrick, could you expand a little bit more on just sort of like resolving conflicts and the tactics that you use for that?
Yeah, so I can think of one in particular where, like, going back to the whole misunderstanding things. There was 2 team members, and it doesn't happen often with my group, but for some reason these 2 team members, one an engineer, one an artist, felt like they were both dissing each other privately, they both felt that, and what we discovered was that they were both wrong. But to resolve that, I took them to lunch. So we went off site, got some lunch. Maybe we had a beer. I don't remember. But it, just talking it through really helped. And they're friends today, and they get along great today. But somehow there was a misunderstanding of intent, and intent is sometimes hard to determine. And then we figured out what the true intent of both of them was, and sort of resolved the situation. But it really all comes down to people respecting each other as people. And because if you can't get to that level, well, then you have a real problem. Then you've got somebody that is not going to work out and shouldn't be part of your team if they can't be personal with someone, understand where someone's coming from. If it's legitimate, then they're not going to work out.
Sunlight is the best disinfection, and that sort of seems like it's been a theme across both interpersonal failure, relationship failure, as well as project level relationship failure. Seems like it ties neatly up to what should be incorporated deeply into your culture. So we're getting close to time, and there's sort of one last question that I want to go to both of you with, and this is, there's a lot of people listening to this who are mid to upper mid-level management, especially at marketing companies. And I'm curious what are some key takeaways for young and aspiring team leaders that you can, sort of everything we've discussed, but like here's like a North Star for young and aspiring team leaders, what's some advice that you would give?
Oh.
And it has to be perfect, and everyone has to be able to resolve their life and grow their career based on this answer.
I can start while Derrick takes a moment to think. The first thing that actually comes to mind for me, I guess 2 interrelated things. One is like find something that motivates you beyond money. I think that's really important as a leader, and people can feel what motivates you. And you need that, so your team can also embody that. If it's a top-down organization where everyone's primary motivation is money, that's not going to lead to a healthy culture. And the other side of that is, make sure that what you're doing is actually something that brings you joy, and then magnify that, radiate that. If you can't broadcast that, you can't expect it from the people around you.
My best advice to anybody that's getting into games or in most, commercial enterprises is know who your customer is inside and out, and interact with them as much as you possibly can, because you'd be surprised how many people making games, making products, they don't really understand who's going to play their game or use their product well enough. And so every month we do a user testing session where we're looking over the shoulders of people playing our products. And so every month it's a different facet of some game we're playing, but then we bring everybody in the room to watch these videos that are over the shoulder videos of people playing the games. And always there are insights. There are always insights into like, what? They like that? Or they didn't like that. You know, the understanding your consumer and understanding who your customer is will make you a rock star on your team, and it might make you a great leader in terms of leading your team, because you will have this expertise and you'll have this knowledge of your customer.
Yeah, it sort of flows from purpose. Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Cool. Well, that's a wrap for our main section. We'll move on to our last segment, which is App of the Week. Start with Warren. Warren, did you bring an app this week?
I did bring an app this week, Xander. So
Great.
I'm about to get on a plane tomorrow on that same team to see some of our team in person. And so I always try to get an opportunity to get a game that I think will be good to play on the plane. And this is your monthly reminder that Apple Arcade exists and has games on it. So I just downloaded Jetpack Joyride 2. And the interesting thing about this is, like, we're actually far enough into the mobile gaming era that we have games that are based on nostalgia for another earlier era mobile game. So I just started playing it. It feels great. I mean, Jetpack Joyride, the original one, was one of the first casual games that I ever really got into on mobile. They've added a lot more depth to it as far as like upgrades, and you know, it's got more of a shooter feel compared to the first one. It definitely feels like something that was maybe in development for a while as a free-to-play game and then retooled for arcade. But no, it's got a great nostalgic vibe. Kind of harkens back to a more innocent era of mobile gaming. And the first 20 minutes have been fun, and I'm going to dig into it on the plane.
Cool. I had the misfortune of the fortune of traveling to Spain, but while in Spain I got COVID. So my whole family had to fly back without me, and I had to stay in Spain for 5 days in a hotel room by myself. So Diablo Immortal saved my life.
Yeah. Thank you. Preach. It's a good freaking game.
I mean, I love Diablo. I've played every single version of it really deeply, and I think they did a great job. I mean, the end game is a little confusing. There is sort of a wall you get to once you get past level 55 or so in any of your characters, but it is so true to the spirit of Diablo, and the fact that you can play it on a phone and take it anywhere with you. It's been a lifesaver.
It's like really amazing to me that how they got lambasted so hard for that game. It's like such a good gameplay experience on mobile device. It literally is like one of the best feeling mobile games I've ever played. And it's just like,
so deep. It's so deep, and you get it for free. I don't see how people could complain about it.
I think it's the fun thing to complain about, and so that's what people do.
Xander, how about you? You got something this week?
I do, and it's one that I don't think I've ever covered before, but I've talked about it so much I'm like not sure if I have, and so I went through all our old planning documents and I haven't found it. So my app this week is ourWorld, which is a free-to-play mobile game. It's basically a Twitch-based roguelike, which sort of redefined how you use Twitch behavior by making your auto attack the default action. And so what it does is it basically strips out a lot of the input barriers that happen with many of these Twitch-based free-to-play mobile games. And it's also has a bunch of roguelike elements, which I really appreciate, which basically means you have randomly generated outcomes, which you can combine in interesting ways to have basically super overpowered characters on specific short-term runs. Really good game. I've been playing it on and off for a couple of years. It's probably, it's up there with Diablo Immortal in terms of those like some of the best feeling mobile games I've ever played. And I guess the longevity really speaks for itself in terms of, I've been playing it on and off for more than a year. So actually I think close to 2 years. So ourWorld is a great game.
ARCH?
Like Archer, but
Okay.
hero.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, definitely worth checking out. And also their monetization is they're so good. I mean, just from like a business perspective, they're so good at monetizing people. So you can do some research there. Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Derrick. Really appreciate having you. If someone wants to get a hold of you or learn more about FlowPlay, where can they do that?
Derrick at FlowPlay, DERRICK at FlowPlay.com.
Awesome. Appreciate you joining us. Warren, take us out.
Yeah, Derrick, it was great to have you, man. This was a super insightful discussion. Really appreciate you being candid about some of your leadership tactics and some of the ways that you've got to see the success that you have with your companies. As always, the podcast was brought to you by the good people over at Upptic. So here at Upptic, we do all things to help games grow, everything from UA, creative development, to the tools around measurement, data science, and creative production, kind of all the interlocking pieces to have a bolt-on buddy to help you grow your game. So that was a really bad description, but basically, if you have a great game and you need some help growing it, reach out to us. We love to talk. We love to just meet cool developers too. And you can reach us through our website. That's upptic.com, upptic.com.
Awesome. Talk soon.